sister.
Hi, sister.
Welcome. If you're listening via podcast, this is episode 40 of the Sunflower Society podcast. Super exciting milestone for us. Just over a year ago, we decided to start recording our weekly conversations we were having. And it's been incredibly helpful. But yeah, we're 40, and if you're watching via YouTube, be sure you subscribe to our channel for more goodies. We're going to be adding a wealth more of playlists in the future that all have to do with holistic, spiritual, and personal development for women. That's the easiest way to say it, right, Kara? We're trying to resurrect what it means to be a Renaissance woman.
That's right.
Well, what are we talking about today? Well, actually, sorry, I'm getting situated. I'm sitting on the floor.
I have my blankie.
I don't have a blankie, but I thought about doing a sound bowl modeling, but I actually did record a video, and we'll put it on our YouTube. Yeah, on how to use a sound bowl, but also why it's actually really beneficial for stress and anxiety. It's literally 4 minutes of me playing it.
Wow. Will I be able to feel the vibration?
You should, because if you wait until at least like the 2.5 minute mark, I almost let the sound stop, and then I catch the wave and just keep going with it.
Catch the wave, man.
It is really cool. Did you get yours yet? Did you order one?
I didn't. I feel like I want to experience yours in real life before I commit.
Sure.
Well, they're an investment a little bit. I mean, it's not like a huge.
If you don't want to commit, you just go to our listeners, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spiritually Strategic Co. Gonzalez.
Just catch the vibration.
Yeah, and you can listen to me play the sound bowl.
I don't think it will be the same though. I don't know. I'll have to see, because I sat in a really large room one time, actually a couple times, and it was crazy. It was crazy how wild it was in a good way.
This is just one small sound bowl
in a small apartment. So yeah. I wonder.
It's actually a really great track for if you literally are taking a 5-minute break to meditate, because I made it exactly 4 minutes long. Mm-hmm. And so I start with 3 long chimes, and then I play it for about 1.5 minutes with the tone, and you can feel the frequency increase. And then I play it 3 more times to end.
Just don't hit the brown note.
Huh?
Just don't hit the brown note. You know about the brown note, right?
No, I don't want to ask, because I feel like this is a poop joke.
It's not a joke. It's a vibration that makes you shit your pants.
I've never heard that. Okay.
Look it up.
Back to focus. That's not what note I'm playing on the but we have our new segment. We have to kick off with our new segment, Fave and Fail. Oh, shoot, I have mine ready to go, so be thinking about it.
Yes.
My fave that I'm calling out, and you guys, if you follow me on IG, you've seen me post about them. But my co-author, I'm actually going to be an author in a couple books this year. One, which Kara and I are still coming out with. Don't worry. I needed a little break.
We technically have our first book, but it's just a mini.
That's true.
It's like
we have our ebook on intuition, so check that out if you haven't yet. We have it embedded in a full online course called Naked Intuition. So getting in touch with God's guidance for your life. So that is our first book. You are correct. We have been working on another one though, an actual book that you will purchase. But I have another book in the education sector. Myself and my co-author, Augie, he and his wife, though, own a green detergent company. So their detergent only has 4 ingredients, and they are called Denovi detergent. It smells fantastic. Your clothes smell fantastic. It's literally 4 ingredients. So if you're into making healthier options or using plant-based home materials, definitely worth the investment. I think they also have a sale code going on right now. So we will link their website in the show notes, but they are my fave and my go-to laundry detergent, the No-Heat detergent. So shout out to them, and they're a Chicago-based company as well. My fail. Well, I look at failing as learning opportunities. So another thing that I treated myself to after 2 months of almost 2 months of quarantine, I actually just went and saw Kara in person a week ago, and I hadn't seen you or the rest of your family since like February. So it was a great visit. But one of the things besides my sound bowl that I invested in is a stand that helps you do headstands for yoga. And you need, I received it. I put it together. Well, it's a fail for now, meaning I'm not there yet. So okay. I put it together myself. It works amazing. It's perfect. I'm struggling to get all the way up. So I've been trying a little bit and making more progress every day, and I will make a video as soon as I can actually get up. But in some respects, it's actually harder than being against a wall because you have to push your entire body weight off the floor to flip your legs up, and you're upside down. So I do it against the wall, right? So if I flip the other way too hard, then it'll just be my legs against the wall. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyways, it's not a complete fail because I'm still learning. But there is definitely still some underlying fears of me like flipping either direction that are probably unwarranted because it's super sturdy and it gives you all the support you need. It's just that act of literally doing the donkey kick to get all my and Kara knows, a lot of listeners might know, it doesn't matter how tiny my waist and other parts of my body get when I lose weight. My legs probably make up a good 75% of my body. Like they're really, yeah, they're really thick, and I have long legs. So that's a lot to ask somebody to get all that balanced.
Hey, well, I know you're going to do it. You might kick some holes in your drywall in the process. I don't know. But
I just need Thaddeus to probably come with me because I need to know what it feels like. I need to know what it feels like with the stand so I know how hard to push myself up. I think if I can just get up to know what that feels like, then I'll be good. But right now, my core is still telling me, ooh, ooh.
Didn't we used to do that in our basement when we were little? I feel like we did.
Probably. And it probably was like nothing. But when I failed the other day, I went back to what we talked about bringing joy and hanging upside down. So I hung upside down on my couch.
Okay. You should have just done an inversion. Like the other inversion where you put your legs up the wall. Like this. You got to push your butt up against.
Oh, but like what Alana does, what Alana always does, and dances on a wall on Broad City.
No.
Oh, no, like I could do that.
Yeah, you can twerk upside down. No. No, I mean when you're laying on your back and then you scoot your butt up to the wall and put your legs at a 90-degree angle like this against the wall. Oh. If you lay like that for 5-10 minutes, you're not supposed to do it while you're menstruating. But it's supposed to help with your lymph flow and stuff like that. And I really think that it does. I have certain
that's what this is supposed to help with, right? Because if you're inverted into a headstand, there's a lot of great health benefits. But so I'm just not there yet. So it's not like the product itself is a fail. I'm just still working on it. So that's my fave and fail.
Cool. All right, well, my fave this week is probably the 25-pound tater tot casserole that I made last night for dinner. I literally could hardly lift it in and out of the oven. It was so ridiculous. My family ate half of it. but my oldest just loves tater tot casserole, so I made it for him, and he was thrilled. He ate it again for lunch today, a few servings, but it was so heavy. I'm just telling you, don't ever make it and think that you should eat it more than like once or twice a year, because just knowing how heavy that was, I was like, I'm gonna just have like a little plate of it. That was a hit.
All this fat is going directly to my body.
Don't even. Then a fail is I just received in the mail today a selfie stick.
I thought you liked it. How is that a fail?
I do. That's a fail. I don't know. Because I never wanted
a personal standpoint, you don't want to accept.
I never wanted to be a person that has a selfie stick.
I don't have one.
I did have a tripod before, but it was strictly tripod. This is actually a tripod / selfie stick. But I always like.
So it has a light ring? Does it have a light ring?
No,
on
it doesn't. No.
Okay.
But I always laugh at people with selfie sticks. I don't know why. It is a tool, and it's a good tool to use. But I consider it a bit of a fail. What are you doing? My daughter just.
I don't think that it's a fail. I think that you're just, you're preparing for your next phase of life, and you just need to accept it.
I need to accept that
you're an influencer.
Around, like a European tourist or something. Or
it is all tourists. I feel like I've seen tourists from all different countries who will whip out a selfie stick real quick.
They are really convenient, though, I will say.
But if you think about it traveling wise, it is actually a lot smarter, and something I wished I would have had in Bali, because I had to keep having a guide or somebody else take my picture, which also is a little bit, you don't just want to ask random people. And not because of profiling. Like, I mean, you could ask a dad who's with a family, and what if they just walk off with your phone by accident? Then you're in a foreign country and you don't have your phone. So, and it's not somebody with, fingerprints and germs, and you don't know where their hands have been, and you're just handing them your phone to take a picture. So I would say the selfie stick is a win.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's get into our episode topic, though. And I know we want to talk a little bit about, we almost feel like let's start at the beginning of our journey, because before we can tackle things that have to do more with.
I'm listening. I'm gonna move my head off camera for 1 second, because my daughter says she has something very important she needs to know.
Whether you are trying to increase your energy levels, or start a business, or start a family, whatever it is that you're trying to kind of up level in your life, I think that it's important to consider, like, we've been getting a lot of questions recently about, well, how do you set your priorities? How do you manage your time? How do you energetically have like the capacity to do all the things you're doing? Like, those have been a lot more questions that we've been getting lately. And so before we even dive into tools for prioritization, or how to bring up your energy levels, or whatever, or attract more of this in your life, whatever you want to fill in the blank with, we have to go back to the beginning step of what can actually spur on an up level, whether that is wanting more wealth, wanting a better relationship, wanting to get married, wanting to have kids, wanting a better career, whatever that up level thing is for you in your life. One thing has to be very certain, and that has to be your confidence in yourself. And because so many of us are tied to other people or constructs that have defined us, there does have to be almost this kind of divorcing from any type of relationship that's toxic or really codependent and unhealthy. So
And
I like the idea of, yeah, let's clarify what it means to have an unhealthy person in your life. Let's put it that way.
Well, and in my mind too, I don't always think that a toxic relationship is birthed out of a relationship with somebody that's unhealthy
That's a good
necessarily.
point.
Because I think that these relationships are really common between like mothers and children and your spouse, you know, a spousal situation where neither person by default is like a terrible person by any means. I mean, we're all working through things constantly and we will be for our whole life, but where it becomes toxic and problematic, and obviously there are those really, really dark, toxic people that exist in the world. That just is, you know. And
People who legitimately have illnesses and are sick.
And are not getting treated for that, or
Right.
you know, fill in the blank. There's other situations. I personally don't think that nobody in my life that I've met, I could look at and say it's just like pure evil to their core, or they're intentionally trying to be harmful to other people, or there are people I understand that are like that. But we're talking about situations where we have what started as a healthy relationship that's maybe morphed into this feeling of I can't be happy without this person, or everything this person does affects how I feel about myself, or everything I'm doing has to be associated with this person. I
Mm-hmm.
specifically, I struggle with this with my children sometimes because as they're getting older, they're gaining independence, and I need as their mom to be okay with them saying, "I don't want to hang out with you right now," and
Right.
that's like
Right.
they need their space, and I should never be trying to like control what they feel like they should be doing at this point, even though they're kind of tweens right now, which is still young, but they are showing those signs of wanting more independence and being responsible enough to take that on. And so for me, I have to make a sacrifice in a way, which is fine, and I'm more than willing to do that, but say, I am not going to monopolize your time. I'm not going to set an expectation as to how often we hang out as a family necessarily. Like that's important to me for mealtime and evening time, and most of the kids naturally migrate down that way anyhow. But they're starting to get their own interests, and for me to say, I'm going to sit here and mope because none of my kids want to be downstairs and hang out with us tonight, instead of looking at it like, hey, me and my husband get a night to hang out together. Like those are the situations um where those relationships can become strained and toxic if you're constantly trying to have the back and forth of, did this person do enough for me, or am I doing this stuff enough for this person,
Mm-hmm.
this person happy. My husband, came home grumpy the other day, and I had this conversation with him where I was like, are you sure I didn't do anything? I feel like I did something. I feel like I did something where you're upset with me. But it had nothing to do with me. I was just internalizing like this feeling, like he had had a rough day at work. It was as simple as that. But for whatever reason, I associated his bad mood with it must be something that I did or said, or no, but it isn't like that, and it shouldn't be like that. So that is just a clarification to start the conversation that it's not we're not talking about get away from toxic people. They're just like, there aren't a lot of like truly evil people, I don't think, in the world.
Yeah. So unless you're married to like an Adolf Hitler type, that we're not talking about a person themselves who is evil or toxic. We're talking about how relationships in general, usually parent to child or spouse to spouse, partner to partner, those tend to kind of dictate our identity and where we find our identity and self-worth. So this is just as much a conversation about those relationships as it is about you and how you arrived at your identity and what you grab onto and find value in from the people you surround yourself with. And we're starting here before we dive into topics like time management or raising your vibration or your energy or whatever, because without the recognition and awareness that some of these perhaps relationships need to be reevaluated, again, not because you're going to leave the person or divorce them or whatever, but because you have wrapped up your identity into too many factors with that person that probably have nothing to do with you. But yet you keep going to that source to be the provider of your identity or to be the joy that's brought to you instead of arriving at that yourself. And so I have an interesting question to kind of guide us with this too. And it was something I'm thinking about just even sitting here, because I've lived with people before and had roommates, and I've lived alone. How hard from your perspective is it, and let's just use you and your kids as an example, how hard is it for you to, when you're in a house day in, day out with 3 kids, for you to establish your own identity as a woman and not have that be the only thing that defines you?
It's really hard, and it's because we're nurturing an actual little tiny baby from like that is helpless. Essentially, if you just left your baby lie there, it would die. So
Right.
you have to bodily take care of that and wake up every couple hours to feed and change diapers and bathe and do all the things. And not to mention, there's healthy developmental milestones that need to go along with that. You need to be actually playing with your baby and like doing tummy time and all the things.
Language development.
There's so much, and it doesn't even cross your mind. Like, I know when I was pregnant with my first, it doesn't even cross your mind that all that's coming. You're like, okay, I got diapers, I got wipes, and I got a little bed for the baby. I think I'm good. But in reality, that quickly shifts into a very long, I would say almost decade of having to constantly provide those things until your child is independent enough to, and that's the goal. That's what a lot of people, I feel like, get stuck in this rut of, I'm the mother, this is the child, I am here to help this child in any way that I can. But where we sometimes miss the mark, and I am 100% guilty of this a lot, so I'm not speaking out of anything we say on this podcast, by the way, it's because we've actually thought this way at one time, or temporarily, or done these things in our lives. So we actually are talking about it from a place of knowledge and where we've been, not just me having this perfect scenario and talking.
Yeah. And we continue to work through it. We're just doing it publicly on a podcast.
Right. Don't know if that's a good idea yet or not, but I think it can't hurt.
Sure, it's a fun experiment.
That's right. I don't have anything to lose, right? I mean, it's all good. Anyway, so when you talk about that aspect and that shift from being 100% a caregiver to having to like back off that after you've already formed this bond with that person and not be afraid that they're going to hurt themselves or eat or drink something that they're not supposed to, or go out and jump off the porch thinking they're Batman, or any of these things that we go through our heads. That's really difficult, and the tendency is to try to latch onto that and even grab a little bit tighter sometimes so that we can kind of try to control the situation, which we all know we have no control over anything. But
it actually comes from fear.
It comes from fear. Absolutely, it comes from fear. And as you get the child older, and I'm noticing this with my boys especially, they don't want to be huggy. They don't want to be snuggly. They're growing into young men. Like,
Yeah.
they are in need of independence at this point. Trial and error. Throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And that's what I have to give them right now. If at a certain point you're not able to let go of that control, that's where some of that, if your whole life revolves around your children and that is all you have a very, very short period of time in reality. So if you're basing your whole existence on the fact that if I didn't have my children, I'd be lost without my children. I've seen and heard a lot of women say that, and it breaks my heart, because it's like, it's out of love, and I know it comes from a place of love and extreme devotion to the well-being of their children and things like that, but it breaks my heart for them, because I'm like, what do you mean? You mean you wouldn't be as much of the woman as you are if you didn't have this child? If you didn't reproduce and pop out this little thing that's beautifully created by God, but is also protected by God, if you couldn't protect and nurture this child, you don't know who you'd be. You don't know where you'd be.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm on the not a mother yet side of things, but I have just as much admiration and respect for more and more women that I see posting that they were courageous enough to make the decision that they didn't want to be a mom. And that's okay. Like, to me though, that takes guts still in our society for people to be okay with that. And it doesn't have to be because you had something medically wrong with you. It could be, I know myself, and this is the lifestyle I wanted. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Honestly, if I'd have known myself in the way that I do now, 12 years ago, almost 13 years ago, when I got pregnant with my son, which was an accident, by the way, but the best accident that ever happened.
The conception was an accident. There's things you can use, Carol.
Exactly. But had I been aware of myself the way that I am now, I would have waited probably until like a couple years ago to have kids. Quite honestly,
really,
not that
I feel incredibly. I know you didn't mean it this way, but I feel incredibly validated right now.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Well, I mean, I'm 3 years younger than her, guys, so she's basically saying she would have waited until about my age, because
I would have waited
now when I have a kid, I'll get to be geriatric. Which is really a nice way of saying mature.
Well, and really, how geriatric can you be in your 30s? It's just bogus that they call it that, but whatever. Advanced maternal age is the more proper whatever.
AKA, I'll have a PhD and you can call me doctor because I'm mature.
Dr. Baby
Dr. Mom! Okay, sorry. You were saying though, if you had it to do over, you might have waited until like just a couple years ago.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think like, how would I react now, in the way that I know how to be still and have peace in my home, where I didn't know that before. I didn't know any of the inner things I've been working on. I have always been kind of I'm laid back in certain ways, but I'm also internally anxious. And in the way that my brain rolls around all the time, I'm constantly thinking. And so that just tends to make me, in certain situations, a little more high strung, because I'm kind of overstimulated all the time. And so if there's any kind of stressor that goes along with that, it just sort of, I know how to mitigate that at this point most of the time. But what I'm saying is, I would have my life, not that I regret anything about my path, but my decision making back then is not what it is today.
Right.
And I think it makes a difference as to how well you know yourself and how okay you are being with yourself and being by yourself before you throw other people in the mix of that in a serious way.
Well, wouldn't you agree that because that informs your self-worth, right? Like it
Right.
makes sense why when I was more emotionally immature than what I am now, still not saying I'm fully emotionally mature, people. I think, right, like my biggest identity factor was my career and my endeavors because that was the world I was in most of the time. I wasn't married and didn't have kids. So by nature, that became my self-value and my identity indicator, so to speak. That was my go-to where I found fulfillment. And it did bring me joy. And I was operating in my gifts and my passion totally. And I love being in education still. So I don't, just like you're saying, you don't look at that with regret. You look at it of, okay, how do I think for us, that's even our mission of how do we share our learning and different things we've learned, whether it's been from therapy or different coaches we've had or mentors we've had, like how do we share this with the world? Because had I known then what I know now, right? Famous phrasing, but a lot of times what unfortunately is that we choose to reside in that one identity factor or container pretty much all of life,
Right.
until we're forced to do otherwise, which unfortunately for women, they're usually forced when their kids leave the house. And it's not because they want to explore who they are, it's because they are forced to, because their only identifying factor was this container of being a mother or being a wife. Which, by the way, that's also always fascinating to me, is that so I hear many women, including our age range and younger, saying how, just like you said, oh, you know, having kids saved my life, or I don't know who I would be without my kids. Oh, they're my reason for living. But then I also kind of feel a certain way, like, okay, what about your husband?
Well, and it's also a lot of pressure on your kids. If you're the reason for them to like feel fulfilled about their life as a child, that's like, ooh, like my happiness and the way I perform in life is like hanging on a thread here, and I'm either going to make or break my parents' spirit if all they have is me. It's like too much pressure to put on a child. That should not be the way that we look at our relationship with our children. We should be looking at our relationship as women as we are powerful. We know a lot. We're very intuitive as women. We're caregivers, we're nurturers, and we have a lot we can teach our kids and invest in our kids. And if we're looking at it from a lens of how my child makes me feel when I'm with them and I need to be with them to feel this way,
it's totally selfish.
Child. It's a
Yeah,
lot of
you're not. Yeah, and you're being selfish. You're not being selfless as a mother. You're being 100% selfish and narcissistic.
Yeah.
Meaning, this individual needs me. It's the same way I feel about how teachers should view students. Meaning, you've gotten the incredible gift of being entrusted to help guide this little human and help nurture and bring out the God-given gifts and talents they already have. So when you start to walk around like you're in charge and you need to impart so much wisdom, like I learn stuff from your kids all the time. I learn stuff from my students all the time when I taught. It does something to the psyche of a child to feel validated that what they say matters. And no, not everything they say matters, but a lot of what they say matters. And if you don't have that type of admiration for your child as well, then you miss building up who they are as a person, and you are forcing a codependent relationship. You're reinforcing that by always being in their face, you're reinforcing even coping mechanisms that turn into workaholics, overachievers, all these different coping mechanisms, perfectionists. That's ultimately, if that pressure is coming usually from somewhere else. It's not because that baby came out of the womb and said, well, I have anxiety about performing well in school. No, that was formulated in whatever environment you created for that child to be raised in. And that's on nobody else but you and your partner. And so I think with that too, how do you do this if somebody wakes up and also then realizes, maybe let's shift from parent child, let's look at partner to partner. If you wake up and you realize your partner or your spouse is like you're both being completely codependent, how do you differentiate that? Because there are a lot of couples who they just really like to spend all their time together. But then there's also couples who they're both really independent. And so the couples over here who might be, and I even had a friend say this to me, like, well, it's really strange that at this point in your relationship, you don't see your man every day. And first of all,
I barely see my husband every day. So
first of all, don't ever say stuff to your friends about their relationships unless they ask your advice. Number one. Number two, don't force what you believe a relationship is supposed to look like on somebody else. Because whereas Kara and her husband might be one way, and our brother and his wife might be one way, and me and my partner might be one way, it's not, you can't live in this world where you judge people and say, well, it's not right that Kara and Anthony don't have a set date night. Like, they should totally have that. Well, says who? What if you don't like going out to eat together? What if you like cooking together?
The thing is, like, for every couple, it is going to be different. And just because a couple or a parent and child, let's just stick with the couples at this point, spend a ton of time together, also doesn't mean that they have a codependent relationship.
Right.
It's all about why you're doing what you're doing. Are you spending time together because you feel like that's what you have to do in order to have a healthy relationship? Or is it born out of, or that's what you've been told by society needs to happen, this really prescriptive way of having a relationship with your spouse, or spending, how much time is the right amount of time? There's people that believe that if your man is not by your side, he's with another girl. There are people that live in that way, like if you don't know where he is, he's probably with some other little side piece over here. There are people that
but I also, this whole topic gets me so riled.
I can tell.
I'm doing a hair toss. I'm doing a hair toss for those of you not watching this on YouTube. Because here's my thought with that. And I don't say it because I don't think I can be diplomatic about it at this point. I don't think I'm mature enough to be diplomatic in how I say it. But I always want to say, if somebody makes a statement like that, I want to say, how much love and trust do you really have in your relationship if you feel the need to control your man's time so much that you think that all love would be lost, right? And he wouldn't be thinking about you if for 2 seconds he goes and does his own thing? What does that say about your level of love and trust in a relationship? Because I have just always approached it this way. If you have the confidence and the self-esteem, I'd like to see you try to find another Justine, because you won't stop on it. And you know what? If you find somebody that's better for you, then good. You should be happy with that person and consider it a blessing that God protected you from being with somebody who didn't appreciate your full value. But don't for a second think that by controlling something or someone, that that's somehow a symbol of love or trust. And there's a lot of people who they get mixed up in this codependency because ultimately, where are they operating from? Fear. Well,
right.
I'm afraid if I don't look at his phone. Well, I'm afraid if I don't check on him. What is he doing? What are you afraid of? What are you doing when your man's not around or your woman's not around?
Or vice versa.
Probably picking your nose. Probably picking your nose and watching Netflix.
Do you want your man to treat you in that way too?
Yes, exactly. Oh, okay.
No, and I'm not gonna. Okay, you can get riled, but I have been there before. I've been in a situation or 2 or 100 where I felt threatened because I did have a very specific relationship with my husband for a long time. And
how would you describe that specific relationship for listeners?
I would say I felt like
what were your norms, I guess? Because then that way maybe somebody can relate to that and see how this is progressing.
I would often feel abandoned when we had really small kids. We had all our kids like 16 months apart.
Right.
So, and I was still working full time until the oldest one was probably 4 or 5. I was working full time still. But on my, it was just like, looking back, it was a blur. I was exhausted, obviously. I was working 3 12-hour nursing shifts a week. I was just barely functioning. And at the same time, my husband was also barely functioning because he worked full time. We were both up at night with the kids at different points. I actually worked nights during part of that time, so he had full dad duty just as much as I had full mom duty. And then my days off were like constant kid stuff. I had 0 time to really focus in on anything about me. And I really lost a big part of myself during my kids' younger years. Not a regret.
Right.
Wish I would have known more about how to make that not happen, and make different choices, because I made a lot of choices that put me in that situation. I made choices of, I would rather see the income from a full-time position, even though we didn't really need it. We would have been fine had I cut back my hours, but because at the time I was the primary breadwinner, I felt pressure to like hang on to that, even though we would have been fine.
Right.
But I wasn't willing to make that decision for myself then.
Right.
I also wasn't willing to ask for help. I didn't ask for help. I expected help and I was resentful about not getting help, but I didn't ask for it. Right. Because I was too prideful and I could do everything by myself. But then my husband would walk in the door after an equally long day at work, different long, but still stressful, and look at me and be like, well, I don't know why you're so stressed out. You just sat here with the kids all day, And so to a degree, I mean, it's true. I made choices about the way that my household was, right, and how I reacted to situations and things like that, because I didn't know what I know now about the way I react and some of the things that I was doing and thinking in certain ways that were not true about the way I should have been operating.
Well, and would you agree that some of those behaviors and actions were really more based on, this was just what I thought I was supposed to do as a mom?
Right.
Versus, yeah, no, I know who I am as Kara, right, and let me decide and determine how this looks for a relationship with my kids and raising kids in a family and having a husband, right, versus, okay, how most of us are, especially if you've walked right into living with somebody or being married to somebody and never really lived on your own for that long. You had a little bit, But when you are younger, you really are just kind of operating off of,
You do whatever you feel
this
like.
is what I've seen. This
Yeah.
is what I've seen, and this is what I think a mom is supposed to do, instead of, no, mom is not my only defining indicator. I was first, before I was a mom, I was Kara, and this is what I believe, and this is what I enjoy, and this is who I am. And none of those pieces has to go away just because then you have the capability to give birth.
Now, I'm not saying that there aren't sacrifices necessary at times.
Right.
Babies operate on a totally different time zone in life, period. But there are ways that of doing it now that I can see more clearly that it's behind me, unfortunately, but hopefully it helps somebody else to be able to say, hey, I knew I was feeling off like for years after having my baby. I didn't understand. I thought it was just me. I thought like I went through a period of time where I totally lost any kind of creative part of me. And I actually had the thought of like, I've loved to write, but I would sit down and be like, I don't even have anything to say. My life is so freaking boring. I have nothing to say. Like, who would listen to, like, who would listen to
baby formulas?
it was definitely a baby fog, and I get that whole sentiment. What I was saying about my husband and I's relationship is I realized quickly he was not intentionally like trying to like neglect anything. He didn't know what he didn't know, and he was operating in the same way he always had operated. It's just that I had changed. I had allowed myself to get into the spot where all I had pretty much was kids 24/7. And that was by default of the situation. Had we been a little smarter, we wouldn't have had kids 16 months apart probably. That was a riot. But I think as we've gotten older and gotten through those stages, it is very abundantly clear to me that I need in my life to have my own interests and my own thing. I'm not Kara Howard, husband of Anthony.
You mean wife?
Oh, did I say? I said yeah, yeah, wife. And I'm not just mom to 3 kids. You know, that's not just what I am. There's a lot inside of me that God is doing that I'm supposed to share. And so it's not taking anything away from my children. It's actually allowing them to see a mom and a woman who they can look up to and admire for being bold and courageous and saying the things that God has called her to say and doing the things that God has called her to do. How often do we get that opportunity to show that side of ourselves to our kids? I'm making a choice right now to show it early.
Right.
I know that a lot of women maybe go through this when their kids are out of the house and it's like, well, I don't have anything else to do, so maybe I'll do this. It's not necessarily born out of desire and like who God made you to be. It's just like, let's fill in the blanks with some activities. Let's see.
Do you think, had you known this and even made it a requirement for yourself to have 2 hours every Friday, even as a new mom, if you even did something like that, where you would have just stuck to like every Friday morning you get 2 hours to yourself because either Anthony was watching the kids or a grandparent was or whatever, if you had it to do over, how important would you say that is for not just new mothers, but people who have multiple kids or people who were, so for me it was my identity factor of and losing creativity, similar to you, but it was because I was just confined to this one box of being a teacher. And that's not all of who I am.
Right.
Like there's a lot of other pieces to who Justine is. So I think part of that realization has to be, regardless of where you find yourself in life, kids or not, partner or not, whatever, you have to value yourself enough to continue that journey with yourself. Because if you don't do that and you don't value yourself that level, how can you expect others to do that for you? And how can you expect to be that even for your kids? So if you look back, had you done something where even, let's just say an hour. So if somebody's out there listening and they're like, I can't even barely fathom how to create an hour of time, what difference would that have made for you?
I know I can remember distinctly as when I first had our oldest, the first couple of days, I found it hard that we were home. I found it really hard to even find time for a shower. And this kid was literally a lump laying in
You were
the
sleeping
bed,
like 18 hours a day.
sleeping at least 18 hours a day. And then I look back at that and I'm like, then I had another one 16 months later, and then another one after that. And each time it didn't get easier, but like I should have and could have figured out, hey, I'm doing this for myself. I feel bad right now. I felt terrible all the time. I was sleep deprived. I was emotionally not doing anything for myself. I felt terrible all the time.
Kira, I can hear you really clearly, but your video's frozen.
Oh,
I'm just like,
oh, I'm running out of batteries. Hold on. I need to go grab my charger. Can you talk for a second?
oh, sure. You know I can talk.
Sorry, I didn't realize my daughter had my phone earlier and she apparently.
That's okay. I know we got to wrap up here in about 5 minutes, but I want to hear your final reflection on that and what difference it would have made. Because one of the biggest factors I think that we keep running into is women who are saying, like, I don't even know where to begin with trying to find time for me. And when that's the initial cause, that's what has given us pause to go back and say, well, before we just throw some tool or some organization type strategy or what we do for prioritizing our energy, before we do that, we have to evaluate where we are with ourselves and where we are in relation to our relationships with others. And if you start to find that there is some codependency and the way how maybe you're defining yourself and your life is solely based on a spouse or children, then that's why we said, okay, let's start at the beginning. And how are you actually finding your identity and what defines you? Then we can figure out how to prioritize your calendar, your activities, all those things.
I'm back. Can you see me?
So you're still frozen. Am I frozen to you?
No, you're not.
You are still frozen, and you look like you're getting ready to tell somebody off.
I know, and you've been talking, and people are probably just staring at that this whole time.
No, it's okay. I mean, I was just kind of recapping the whole why we went back to. You can just show your picture if you want. Do you want me to do that?
Yeah. How do you do that?
I'll stop your video.
Okay.
Well, it just has your name. That's okay.
Okay. That's cool.
But I was recapping for listeners, basically full circle, why we decided to start with codependent relationships first, because we could throw something at you and say, hey, these are our tools for how we prioritize time. This is how we have energy to do this. But none of that stuff matters at all if you still don't know boundaries for how you define yourself and where you find your sense of self-worth. So if you could just kind of bring it back home to what difference that would have made when you're having these kids pretty much 16 to 18 months apart. And
I think ultimately, it comes back to honoring yourself enough and honoring the person that you're with, your partner or um, your children, to be able to have an open dialogue about who you are and what you really need, instead
Right.
of coming from a place of, I have to ask permission to be myself, I have to get approval. I
Hmm.
I almost operated in the sense of, and my husband is not at all that way as a man, but
No, it's not.
operated I operated from a place of, well, I feel like I have to ask permission, or like, I feel like he's going to be mad at me if I leave him here for a couple hours with the kids, even though that's absolutely crazy and ridiculous way of thinking. And I'm sorry, but if you're listening to this and you're offended by that because that's how you operate, that is not that is not a healthy way of thinking. I will tell you that a lot of that is learned from the kind of strict religious tradition that we grew up in. That is kind of how, you know, wives were to interact with their husbands, type of thing.
Well, it's
And
also patriarchal gender roles, very
yeah,
traditionalist, that, I mean, really
and I
date
think
all the
a
way
lot
back.
of people in the church that have grown up in the church understand what I'm saying,
Right.
but may not be at the point where I'm denouncing it. I'm saying right now that is not how God intended you and made you to be. God made you in his image. So let that sink in. God made you as a woman in God's image.
Right.
And it doesn't, there's this sense of, when you enter into a relationship, there's a certain amount of respect there for time, issues of scheduling and things like that. But also there's a certain component of independence that you need to, in space that you need to keep for yourself.
Right.
If your happiness, and we said this in the beginning, if your happiness is tied to how how much time somebody spends with you, or what kind of time, or how, like, what that looks like, or you feel like I did earlier this week, I felt my husband was grouchy, so I thought that I did something, which is ridiculous, but I'm saying this honestly because it is my first instinct to internalize that and like turn it on myself. If we can get rid of that guilt and shame that comes with some of these things that we put into our relationship, it is so freeing in those moments that um, I'm able to like separate from him or from my kids and be 100% fulfilled in the way that I needed in that moment.
Right.
It it makes sense as to why a toxic codependent relationship is not the way to go, because not only am I hurting myself, I'm also hurting that other person that I'm in relationship with, and not modeling a healthy way of interacting or being themselves, because in turn then my daughter might grow up thinking, oh well, I have to, mom always did this with my dad, and this is just how I operate as a woman in a relationship. Or my sons might look at it and think, well, I know my mom acted in this way towards my dad. This is how I expect my future partner to react to me or be with me. And it's just perpetuating then a whole generation. Again, we're trying to, part of what Justine and I are passionate about too is breaking the mold. Like, we grew up in a very traditional kind of religious background.
Well,
And
I would say that was also influenced by the fact that, even when you look at different gender roles across the world,
right,
and especially specific to Latin America, which is our dad's heritage, like, there are very traditional gender roles and expectations that perpetuate different Latino cultures.
right,
So there's a couple different layers, that existed, and we're not terrible, right? It's not to look at something as oh, I don't like, just, I think always remember that your parents are human, or whatever mentors you have or models you've seen, those are humans who are living that way. So the best thing you can do is to be clear on what God wants for you
Right.
and what your identity is in God, because that will give you the breadcrumbs to know, you know what, this is actually what I really need in a spouse. This might not be what my parents want for me, right? But this might be exactly what I need if I'm secure in my identity in Christ, and not just, I think a good rule of thumb in all of this, if you're really thinking through some things, anytime you start operating and saying, oh, well, I really should do this, just start to really evaluate the use of that word should in your vocabulary. Because if you're saying should, that means you feel obligated, and you're probably operating from a place of guilt or shame, which
Right.
are some of the lowest levels you can be operating at in life. And
Because part
then
of
that's
you,
why people end up getting resentful and
yeah,
bitter or whatever towards their
and
spouse or even their
and
kids.
it's not necessarily something, maybe some of you out there, your spouse is putting that on you, and that's a whole different conversation. But a lot of it is self-inflicted. We say this to ourselves. And in moments when I say should anymore, I say no, I'm not doing that, because my initial thought of that was this feeling of, oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, I guess I should do that. Who says? Who says you should do that? Does 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 Jesus say you should do that? Does does the Lord above say you should do that, or whatever higher power you believe in? Is that who is telling you, or who you're taking your cues from in life? Does that higher
Who?
power
Who?
tell you should do anything? Most likely that higher power, or God for Justine and I, is using your inner voice and your intuition and all of that to remind you that you're an individual in this world. He made you special. He made you perfect the way you are. You have desires based on who he made you to be. And for you to shove those down and put them in a corner and invalidate them for something you should be doing is a tragedy. We
Well,
don't
and,
believe
and
that.
and when you think that way and that's your mindset, this is a whole other topic, and I do have to close this out because I have another time obligation actually. but but um when you are operating in that space, you're going to attract doors that open for you that are what you're putting out. So if you start to make decisions from a place of guilt and shame of saying should, you're going to attract doors that are built on resentment or guilt or shame. And that might be a really hard pill to swallow, but I want to leave us with that, because when you make a decision based on should, then you are more likely to attract things that they're in that same realm of operating off of guilt and shame. And that's not healthy. You're not attracting God's best, whether it's a career or a spouse or whatever. You're not attracting God's best when you're operating out of should, um, because it's going to attract motives or opportunities that are actually riddled with guilt and shame. That's my belief.
Not
And so
only that, it
our
allows,
mind is really powerful, and we have to be start to get very aware about what you're thinking, when you're thinking it, and why you're thinking it.
it also allows other people to be the author of your life when
Right?
you say should.
You
You're
give
letting
you
them,
you you basically self-select that you're powerless. And
exactly.
then there's no self-accountability because you want to be able to point the finger and say, well, it's my husband's fault. He made me stay home.
Right,
As if
right.
you didn't have a voice, right? Or as if you didn't have a choice to discuss those things before you married the person, you know?
And here's the thing, some women, I do believe there are some women out there in those relationships where they don't, because if they do make a choice on their own, they're going to get beat. or they're going to get hurt in some way, emotionally, physically, whatever.
Right.
So we're not talking to that right now because neither of us have walked that walk before. That is a whole different situation that I will put a disclaimer on. And there are, safe ways to try to get out of those situations. So if you have a situation like that, obviously in most places there are domestic violence centers. For women specifically, there are lots of things that are out there and resources that can help you get out of those situations. Many times in those situations, it is your voice and you saying, no, I don't, I honor myself more than this. I know that God has more for me, and being able to step away from, and that is a type of codependent relationship. Domestic violence is a type of relationship, and you being able to find God within you and say, I'm strong enough. I can walk away from this, and I'm going to be taken care of more than I ever have in my whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope each of you who has viewed this or has listened to this, you have found some value. Please feel free to share the episode with somebody you love, and continue.
Naked Intuition, because we're going to close enrollment soon.
Yes, if you haven't enrolled, enroll in Naked Intuition. If for no other reason, then you get our first ebook that we published. It's, I think, around 35 pages, pretty quick read. But there's so much value in that course if you're really serious about prioritizing you, but most of all, prioritizing your relationship with God, and you're getting in touch with that guidance from a divine power. So check it out. It's at spirituallystrategic.com. We also have the link in our spiritually strategic co Instagram, as well as our personal Instas. We'd love to hear from you and hear about other topics you want us to talk about. But this has been episode 40. It's been a blast as always. And I will talk with you later, sister.
Bye, sister.
Bye.